the incredibly shrinking dollar. The dollar falling again against the euro today after that weak new home sales number. In fact, in the last year, the dollar's dropped 10% against the euro. The euro now costs about $1.41. And it's not just the euro. Last week, the dollar hit a 3-decade low against the Canadian dollar. This morning, the greenback hit a record low against a basket of 6 major currencies. As tracked by the New York Board of Trade, we're talking about the dollar index.
There's a dollar crisis out there, and people's money is being stolen. People who have saved, they're being robbed. I mean, if you have a devaluation of the dollar at 10%, people have been robbed of 10%. But how can you pursue this policy without addressing the subject that somebody's losing their wealth because of a weaker dollar? And it's going to lead to higher interest rates and a weaker economy. Congress, in essence, has ceded total control of the value of our money to a secretive central bank. Congress created the Federal Reserve, yet it had no constitutional authority to do so. But all these actions directed by the Federal Reserve alter the purchasing power of our money. And that purchasing power is always reduced. The dollar today is worth only 4 cents compared to the dollar that the Federal Reserve started with in 1913.
I find myself increasingly in a place mentally that I just don't want to be. But the more you learn and the more you look at history. This weekend I was reading about the crash of 1907 and how that thing was controlled and what came out of that and came to the Fed. I mean, we're repeating the same mistake, and it was always to give these private individuals control, almost a fourth branch of government or a separate tree of our economic system. How do we untangle ourselves from this?
Well, there is no more ominous power than to give this authority to a secret bank to create money out of thin air. And it works as long as people trust the money. But if the money has no backing to it and is not convertible into anything, it eventually ends. And this is what we're witnessing, the beginning of the end of the dollar hegemony. It is going to end because the world is starting to reject it.
But listen to what John Williams says, and he makes these predictions to Fortune 500 companies and hedge funds around the country. This is the guy who gets paid for his advice, and we're lucky enough to get him on CNN.
Where are we going? We have a severe recession ahead of us with even higher inflation than we're seeing now. It's going to be probably the worst business cycle seen since the Great Depression.
The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express.
So the Federal Reserve is actually an illegal entity functioning within government. It's illegal, and what we have given to this so-called agency is the authority to counterfeit money.
Do you have any points of view about the Federal Reserve and how the Federal Reserve operates?
They just enter something on a computer. Oh, you need 20 billion today. Here's 20 billion. But they got that out of thin air. It came out of thin air. It goes to the Treasury. The Treasury then pays the bills.
What's not good about 400 points on the Dow?
It's pouring huge amounts of money into the system. It's printing money. It's going to cause more and more inflation. The dollar's going to continue to go down. It's going to cause a worse recession in the end.
The president really has no control, nor does the Congress have any control over this cartel. It just has the appearance of control.
But I want to get your take on how much lower you think the markets can go right now.
We think that the markets can decline 50 or 60%. We hate to say something so somber, but it's not the time to be optimistic or pessimistic. It's time to be realistic. Our whole system has been built on credit expansion. We have to grow credit year over year in order to keep the economy growing. The economy is not going to grow. It's going to suffer recession, and once it enters recession, it's going to cascade on itself.
How much money does the Federal Reserve have? I know they can run the printing presses forever, but that is not good for the world. Inflation is not good for the world. A collapsing currency is not good for the world.
But The bad news this morning seemed to be irrelevant compared to yesterday's announcement of the most sweeping reform and regulation of the financial sector since the Great Depression. So if that is why the market is so happy, how long is that going to last? I mean, isn't this a little like rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic? Isn't it already too late?
You got to let them go. You know, I mean, if I had made the same bad bets as Bear Stearns, nobody would be bailing me out. You know, why should the average American have to pay more for gasoline and more for food because these Wall Street guys screwed up? Let them go under.
This is the reality of the crisis in the U.S. economy. People who used to own their own homes are living hand to mouth on land once occupied by those less fortunate.
OPEC says the reason for $105 or $106 a barrel oil is the falling value of the dollar, and you won't address that issue. Where do we go to find out who's right?
Wendell, I'm under strict instructions and have been from the beginning to not talk about the dollar, and I'm not going to get fired to satisfy your question.
But I will ask you this. What would be the first two things you would do if you were in Mr. Bernanke's seat tomorrow morning?
I would abolish the Federal Reserve and I would resign.